is this a survival situation where you just had a knife and a lighter, or were you planning to go winter camping? What's the scenario? If it's purely survival, I go out and cut spruce boughs.
Yeah.
And just layer them super, super thick.
Okay.
So you're never touching the snow.
Welcome to the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast.
This is it. It's the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name's George. Scott Sunderwald with us.
Hey, it's good to be back, George.
Scott, it's winter now in the Northern Rockies, so we're talking snow shelters this episode.
Yeah.
We did a winter camping. If you guys really want to dig into some winter camping, I think still our most downloaded episode is like episode 4 of the podcast. Scott really gets into some winter camping techniques and tips. This episode a little more dedicated to like actually camping in the snow.
Yeah. Types of shelters you can make out of the white stuff.
We wait to do our like podcast question of the week till later on in the episode, but I thought maybe we'd start with some of the responses on this one because it's pretty wild. So the question of the week was, what's the coldest temperature you've slept in, and where were you? Anything come to mind for you, like coldest temperature you've been out camping in?
Yeah, I think like minus 35. I slept in a lot of snow shelters in minus 30, 35, lean-tos. Of course, hot tents, but that feels like you're cheating a little bit. But yeah, that's probably been the worst. But
Morris commented minus 30 in a wall tent north of Burns Lake, and then also minus 20 in a snow cave. We'll get into snow caves in this episode too, because I'm interested to hear about that. Frank said minus 44 in Northern Ontario. My friend and I had actually planned it that way. So.
Wow.
My mom wrote in too. She said around minus 40 at Fairfax Lake in a wall tent. End of December. Truck froze up, wouldn't start, and they had 2 little kids. So that's when that's the thing too. We were kind of talking about it before we recorded today, but like at these temperatures, like minus 40, like it's not guaranteed you're gonna get back to your vehicle, and it's gonna, that's not gonna be your, hop in and everything will be warmed up real quick.
You might be there longer than you were bargaining for.
Yeah. Canadian Bushcraft on Instagram commented minus 42 in northern Manitoba without the wind chill. Was sleeping with just the clothes on us and an open fire inside a lean-to shelter.
Nice.
Yeah, no sleeping bag, no blanket. You've done that.
I haven't done it that cold. Minus 35 I did. No sleeping bag, no sleeping pad, just my clothes and a fire.
Yeah.
But we were using spruce boughs and that to get us off the snow.
Man, we've got there's over 100 responses here. I'm just trying to like go through like some of the crazier ones, but I mean, there's a lot of people that are out there minus 47, minus 42, Cold Lake, on the ice. There's a few different, like people said that like the hot tent. I mean, hot tent with minus 40. It seems like it's, you don't really notice it as long as your fire's going there.
Yeah.
Minus 30 for 5 nights in a lean-to in northern Alberta. Had the heaviest, thickest sleeping bags we could find, and we're actually decently warm when the fire was going. So thanks for all of these responses. It's crazy.
Some hardcore people out there. It's
and
great to see.
Most of these ones aren't survival ones. Like these are, recreation. So we'll get into that, but then also the survival side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's one. Minus 17 at Everest Base Camp last year. Slept pretty well too. So yeah, some pretty cool adventures. So thanks for sending these in. That's great. Does it motivate you when you see these people are out there? It's like minus 40. It's like,
now I was thinking, geez, I thought minus 35 was pretty badass, but now I got to up my ante. I got to wait till we get the minus 45 and force myself to go out there. No, that's great. I mean, at those temperatures, you are in a survival situation. We often talk about the rules of 3 in survival. Are you familiar with those?
No,
The rules of 3. So it's like you can last about 3 minutes without air.
Okay. Yeah.
You can last 3 hours without shelter in severe cold. So that's your minus 40, right? If your car breaks down and you're dressed in regular civilian clothes, you might not make it 3 hours in minus 40 if you're out in the bush. 3 days without water.
Okay.
And then 3 weeks without food. So, I mean, those are rough. People can go longer and shorter, but it kind of gives you a sense of the survival priorities. And then based on the rules of 3, you get, in a survival situation, shelter is number 1, because in severe temperature, you need it in 3 hours. Water's number 2, because you got the 3 days. And then fire's nice to have, so that's number 3. And then lastly, food, because you can go 3 weeks without food.
These, like, there's snow shelters. Are you choosing that, like, over fire?
Well, it depends where I am, right? So that's really worth chatting about for a while. Like, I used to teach survival in the BC mountains, and then I taught it on the Saskatchewan prairies, and then here we are in Alberta for the last 20 years. So very different climates, very different habitat.
Yeah.
So let's say the best time to use a snow shelter is you're on the open prairie or up in the alpine. There's not much for trees. So your lean-to and fire is not a great option at that point. Maybe flat open prairie. And it's bitter cold, icy wind. The colder it is, the better a snow shelter works, actually. In fact, once things start melting or you get your Chinooks and it's wet, heavy snow, you'd be way better off to build a lean-to and a fire, or even an A-frame out of the bush. But man, I think it's like an insurance policy. Everybody should know how to build a snow shelter, how to sleep in them, just in case you ever have to, right?
What's the go-to snow shelter then? What's the first one you go for?
I'm going to give you a wishy-washy answer there too. There's like 5 different ones you can build and modifications of all those 5, but it depends where you are. So again, if you're on the prairies in Saskatchewan, windswept, and you've got that really hard-packed snow, you walk on it and it's squeaky like styrofoam.
Yeah.
That would be a good time to build something out of snow blocks that you could cut out, right? And that's when people build igloos, but we can get into that. They're fairly technical. If you have big snow drifts in the mountains, the snow cave is super quick because Mother Nature's done most of the work for you, and you can hollow out a snow cave. Again, I think all of these we're going to come back to and talk about the technicalities. In the military, they like the snow trench. It's fast and concealment. So, from airplane or helicopter or even other Army personnel, you're not casting much of a shadow. You would just disappear on the landscape.
Yeah.
They're like a coffin in the snow. And what am I missing here? The Quinzee, of course. So you can build a Quinzee out of snow, even ankle deep. It's just a hell of a lot of work. You're doing a lot of shoveling. And then lastly, the tree wells, which, there's plenty of danger with tree wells, but certain mountain conditions where you get those deep wells, you can modify them and make a pretty cozy shelter in a tree well as well.
Yeah.
As long as you don't get caught stuck in there.
The tree wells, I think we actually talked about this on a podcast before, but you can be 20 feet down sort of thing, hey? Like, it's a little dangerous.
Yeah, most people know tree wells because they had a horrifying experience with them. If you're a backcountry skier or even snowboarding on Marmot Basin, people have flipped upside down in a tree well. Yeah. And maybe you went by yourself and now you're calling for help. Nobody can hear you. They can be pretty scary and kind of swallow you alive. Yeah, I saved a kid from a very deep tree well on a survival trip many years ago and had to climb down. So I have a healthy respect for those things. Yeah. But that's the negative side. The positive side is, again, Mother Nature's built almost this perfect shelter if you can get in and out safely and hollow it out to your needs for a sleeping platform.
You got a favorite one, like out of those 5?
I've done mostly the Quinzee because it's fairly non-technical. Anybody can do the Quinzee. It's just backbreaking work. Yeah. So it's hard work, but it's not technical. Like an igloo, most survivalists will say, don't even attempt an igloo if it's your first time in a survival situation because you won't get that dome properly done. You can cheat on an igloo and make sort of a snow pyramid, or you can like get your walls built with your ice blocks and then put support structure, like head into the bush and get some sticks to go across.
Okay.
And then cut snow blocks to put on top. The roof is really hard because you got to get that spiral just right and put in that keystone without the whole thing collapsing on you. Right?
Yeah. I think that's what's scary for a lot of people. Like even like let's get into the Quinzee, but it's like, okay, you're underneath a bunch of snow. Like there's always the chance of it coming down on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had that happen. I may have mentioned that on one of the podcasts where I was teaching a survival program, so it was rather embarrassing because I got buried alive in a Quinzee. Had to get saved by my students. The trick is, so we can get into it. So let's say you're lost in the bush or you're on a hunting trip. It's -30, -40, so it's really cold.
Yeah.
Quinzee's not a bad idea at this point. Hopefully you have a shovel. You could use a snowshoe or a pot even and start scooping.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're not alone. You want the pile of snow to be generally as high as you are tall. You can get away with shoulder height, but so that's a big pile of snow, right?
Yeah.
And then ideally you want it to let it sit for about an hour minimum. And that's where I went wrong on this course because we were in a rush to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And we started hollowing out way too quick.
Okay.
From two directions, and then the guys ran off to look for sticks, and I was in there, and this whole thing came down, and it was a three-man Quinzee, so very big, heavy. I was pinned to the ground. It was like being buried in an avalanche. The weight was unbearable.
Ugh.
You can't breathe. It's dark. When you exhale, your rib cage, the snow settles down on your rib cage, so you're constricted.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was laughing because I knew they would find me and find my feet sticking out. But I do a lot of solo trips, and that was a big wake-up call for me. I thought, man, if I was by myself in the back 40, they'd find my body in the springtime. Like, you'd be
You're not moving.
Yeah, you're not moving. It'd be a bad way to go. So, yeah, there's two big hazards with snow shelters. One is the collapsing. The other is the carbon monoxide. So you got to be aware of both of those.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're building a Quinzee, you're making a giant pile as tall as you are.
Yeah.
Leaving it for an hour.
Yeah.
And then digging it out.
So I wish we could let's paint a picture for folks of what the inside looks like, because it's not just a hole. What you want to do is start your entrance as low as possible and actually build a cold well or a cold sink.
Yeah, I was reading about that today. Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to think that was like an old wives' tale until I used thermometers and actually tested it scientifically. And it's a real thing. So what happens is the cold air settles in the cold well, and you build a sleeping platform higher up. And your sleeping platform is going to be way, way warmer than your cold well.
Yeah.
And even the cold well, the carbon monoxide is going to settle down there too, right? And then you want that dome shape. Try to smooth out your ceiling as best as you can, because every bit that's kind of sticking down like an icicle, if it starts heating up, it could start dripping on your body or on your sleeping bag.
Yeah.
And I like to keep, now that I've had one collapse on me, I like to keep my roof no more than a foot thick.
Okay.
Just so that's thick enough to insulate from the -40 outside.
Yeah.
But if it does collapse, I'm not buried alive. I can get out of a foot thick snow, but I can't get out of, 6 feet of snow over top of me.
You got an air vent with something like this too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important. And ideally, don't make one, make two so that you get airflow.
Okay.
And they don't have to be very big. Like you can poke a stick sort of the left and the right of your snow shelter, and it just allows that airflow, especially if you're lighting a candle for light and warmth in there, which I like to do. It really heats it up quite nicely.
Huh.
And people are like, well, can you light a candle? And the answer is yes. If you think of the Inuit who lived in igloos for thousands of years in the wintertime, they would have their oil lamps, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
they would use them for light and warmth and even cooking and melting snow. So as long as you keep some airflow going in that shelter. And then a good trick with your Quinzee is you want to plug your entrance so that you're not letting in the cold air. But plug it with your backpack is really good.
Okay.
Something that you
Yeah.
could kick out if you had an emergency in the night and you had to get out quicker. I have slept in snow shelters where there's a blizzard outside, and that's always a little more scary because what if it drops 2 feet of snow in the night?
Yeah. Your roof's getting pretty thick.
Are your air vents clogging up? Is your entryway clogging up? So you kind of want to be cognizant of what's going on outside as well.
You mentioned that you had a thermometer in there. So like, let's say it's a -30 or a -20 day. Like, is it warm? Like, comfortable? Are you wearing your t-shirt in there, or are you still like fully bundled up? Or
generally, you want to keep your Quinzee or snow shelters around the freezing point.
okay.
So you're still got your layers on and a good sleeping bag, or if you don't have a sleeping bag, you're burying into a thick bedding of spruce boughs and grasses and cattails, whatever you can find.
Yeah.
You can heat that up big time. Like, just for the heck of it, one time I fired up a camping stove, which again is very dangerous for carbon monoxide, but it was an experiment to see how hot I could get the inside of the Quinzee. And the reason I did that was I thought, what if somebody falls through the ice and we have to really warm them up?
Mm-hmm.
And I could get that Quinzee over 20 degrees Celsius quite easily because it's so insulated. But if you push it too long, A, you're going to build up carbon monoxide. B, you're going to get a lot of moisture dripping.
Yeah.
Right? So you can only play that game for a short amount of time.
Do you notice that in the morning, like after a night sleeping, are you pretty soaked? Like sleeping in something like that?
Yeah. So for anyone listening who's into hot tenting, the beauty is you're warm and dry. The problem with all the snow shelters is you always feel a bit clammy.
Yeah.
From making them, generally you work up a sweat, and that's a big danger. You can go to bed soaking wet from sweat and get hypothermia, even though it's not that cold. And just the condensation, like you're sleeping in water. You're sleeping in frozen water, your breath. And so everything feels a bit sticky and clammy.
Yeah.
Which is why if I have a choice, I will take a lean-to and fire over a snow shelter.
Yeah.
And I've slept in -35 in those, as long as you got enough firewood.
Yeah. Quinzee is, I've watched some videos on it. They look like you can make like some pretty giant ones.
Oh, yeah.
And then at least one of the things I was looking up today was, so you have like your sleeping shelf, which is kind of like your highest point in there, but then also like a working shelf too, or whatever, where you're just kind of, I guess, cooking or hanging out or whatever. Still higher than your
Cold well. Yeah.
But I mean, some of these ones I was just looking at pictures online, like they're pretty expansive,
They're fancy. Yeah, we used to build them, and we'd build 2 sleeping platforms and a trench down the middle.
Yeah.
Fill it with grasses or straw.
Oh, cool.
And so you're never really touching snow. If you've got animal hides like a bear rug or sheepskins, you can throw them down. You get a candle in there. It's bright and cheery.
Yeah.
And if the winds are howling outside, you're sitting in there playing cards, having a drink. And
cozy.
It's great. I build them every year with my kids when they were young.
Yeah.
In the backyard, and
cool.
we'd sleep in them. And my aim there was to take the fear away for them, so that they would know if they ever had to build one, it's like, oh, this is easy. We can do this.
Yeah. Do you is there a timeline with something like that? Like, use it for a night and then it's like, okay, we got to build a new one, or like
you can use them for a long time. The problem with the older they get, the less they breathe, so they turn more like ice inside.
Okay. Yeah.
So we used to do a little survival program activity. I'd get everyone to put their face in the snow.
Yeah.
And like deep in the snow, push your face in the snow and try to breathe. And everybody can breathe, and they're shocked that you can get that much oxygen through snow.
Okay.
Because it's fluffy and it's light.
Yeah.
But try that on ice.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
ice doesn't breathe, but snow does. They say even when you're buried by an avalanche, you do have quite a bit of oxygen in there,
Yeah.
at least for a half an
For a
hour.
while. Yeah. So what's the big difference then between a Quinzee and a snow cave?
So snow cave, you're looking for that snowdrift.
Yeah.
And in the mountains, you've seen them, I'm sure. And even on the prairies, think of the ditches that fill up with snow.
Yeah.
And as kids, we used to put on our snowsuits and we'd dig in like badgers. We wouldn't even have shovels. We'd just kick the snow and scoop it out.
Yeah.
There again, I'd be really cautious about how much weight you have above your head.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness we never had it collapse on us as kids. I have heard of kids dying doing that. So as parents, you do want to watch it if your kids are alone doing this. I'd, give them some adult supervision because snow is pretty heavy. One of the things on that, I've seen a lot of these drawings in survival books where mountaineers are digging snow caves in the side of a mountain, and they have like 6, 10, 15 feet of snow above them. I would never, ever do that. Because if that's coming down on you, you're not getting out.
Yeah.
You've just built your own coffin. So again, try to have a foot thick of snow above your head. You can measure the depth. So with the Quinzee or any of these snow shelters, I'll take sticks and measure a foot thick. Any stick from the bush will do, and plunge it in.
Yeah.
And then when you're hollowing out the inside, as soon as you hit a stick, you've gone as far as
I
you
see
should.
what you're saying. Yeah, you're pushing this from the outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So your shelter often looks like a hedgehog or a porcupine.
Right.
And that's just making sure you don't accidentally kick through your walls, because I've done that too. You've got this nearly perfect shelter done. You've worked on it for hours, and suddenly you kick through the wall. Now you've got a big hole that you got to patch.
Heartbroken.
Right? Yeah.
So then, like with the snow cave, are you having like a cold well in that too? Then, or
the inside of the snow cave ideally looks identical to the Quinzee.
Okay,
you got a cold well, down low entrance. You got a nice sleeping shelf higher up where the warmth is going to settle. And think about that. If you've ever slept in a cabin with a wood stove and you're like, I'm taking the top bunk, and then you regret it because you're in like plus 45 and everyone down on the bottom bunk is sleeping nice and comfortable. So the hot air really does rise inside a snow shelter.
And then, so your next, so we talk Quinzee, snow cave, snow trench. As easy as it sounds, you're just digging a trench?
Yeah. The snow trench, again, tends to be something you see more in military books, and it makes sense. Imagine you got your platoon out, you're doing some Arctic military exercise. You have to conceal from the enemy, and you need a quick shelter. Well, you take a shovel, and you basically cut a coffin-size hole in a snowdrift. And then you can use sticks to put across the roof. If you have a tarp, that's great, or a Mylar blanket. If you have none of those, you can just cut big snow blocks and kind of make them like a triangle, or what am I saying? Like a teepee roof.
Yeah.
And lay them across. And so from the sky, you wouldn't even know that there's humans sleeping down below. Like you'd be completely concealed. And I slept in them. They're quick to make, easy. They're practical. They're quite safe. The only problem with the snow trench, most survival guides will have you sleeping right on the snow in the cold well. So you don't have that sleeping platform. Does that make sense? So
you almost need to have a little trench next to your trench.
Yeah. So to do it right, you should dig down fairly deep, build that cold well, and then build up and build a sleeping platform, if that makes sense. Can you picture it?
Yeah.
Because that cold well will be, again, let's say it's minus 40 outside. Your cold well can be minus 17.
Yeah.
And then your sleeping platform could be minus 5 or 0 degrees with a candle. So that's a big difference from sleeping in minus 17 to sleeping in
Yeah.
0 degrees, right?
So when we could dig into a little bit now too. Like, so when you're sleeping in these snow shelters, are you like, do you have a pad you're sleeping on? Is that the best concept?
Yeah. So again, is this a survival situation where you just had a knife and a lighter, or were you planning to go winter camping? You know,
Right.
what's the scenario? If it's purely survival, I go out and cut spruce boughs
Yeah.
and just layer them super, super thick. So
Okay.
you're never touching the snow. If you're more in the prairies, you're going to find cattails around marshes or dry grasses, that sort of thing. There's usually some sort of vegetation that can get you off the snow. If it's a winter camping trip, get a good one of these thermarests that has an R value of like 5.
Okay.
And even then, I usually throw that down on some spruce boughs just to provide even more insulation, because often the coldest you get in a snow shelter is not around you, it's underneath you, right? You want to get off that snow because it'll suck that core temperature right out of your body.
You got any recommendations for a winter sleeping bag?
I have one that I'm pretty happy with. It was by a company called Climate, with a K, Climate, and the bottom is polyester and the top is down. So it's still fairly light.
Yeah.
And polyester is better if it gets wet.
Yeah.
So they built it that way, so if you get snow or condensation, it'll insulate, and down is a better loft, right? But if down gets wet, if those feathers get wet, they lose their insulative value. But there's lots of great sleeping bags out on the market. It depends how much you want to spend. And man, most of my survival trips and winter trips I did with a crappy bag. So you can get by with other lesser gear. You're just going to have to layer up more. I used to bring hot rocks into the sleeping bag. They'd stay warm for about 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
A lot of people will pour boiling water in their Nalgene bottle.
Yeah.
And stick that in there. And of course the hot shots, right? And you can get these hot shots now that
Oh, yeah. We just picked up a pack, actually.
yeah, you can get the body size ones that you put on your chest or
Oh, cool. Yeah.
between your knees or something, and really keep that blood flowing. And they're good for like 8 to 10 hours. So
Yeah.
and they're not expensive, like a few bucks.
Throw some of those in your camping gear and your...
Put them in your toes,
Yeah.
in your little booties. Yeah.
So then so we talked about Quinzees, snow caves, snow trenches,
Yeah.
tree pit
The tree well,
or
yeah.
tree well.
Yeah, some people call it tree pit. Yeah, so again, think about times you've gone skiing.
Yeah.
And you've skied, like, you've gone off the groomed areas and you're in the trees and you see these drifts that form around the trees, and there's a hole down the trunk of the tree to the base. And if you're in the BC mountains, man, we would get tree wells that were 15 to 20 feet deep, like crazy.
Yeah.
Here in Alberta, like a 6-foot tree well is a pretty deep one. But even that, you might find a 6-foot tree well. You're lost in the bush. Just go very carefully and start hollowing that out, and you can build a shelter under the tree. Your walls are already there. Now you can lay spruce boughs for a roof, make some snow blocks.
Yeah.
And again, Mother Nature has done half of your shelter for you. So if you don't have your shovel and your snow saw, you can scoop that out pretty easily. Just don't get stuck down a 20-footer and not be able to crawl out, right? Yeah, they're very deep, but pretty handy.
Yeah. And then the fifth one is the igloos. I mean, that's like, I guess if you've got, like, as you kind of mentioned at the beginning, not really a survival one necessarily, but if you got some time and you want to, put some effort into it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
they're really cool. They're fun to try and fun to build. And
yeah,
you'll walk away with such a admiration for the Inuit hunters who can build one of these in an hour with perfect symmetry. But it's one of those things, like if I handed you a violin and said, play me a song, you'd sound horrible, right? You need to practice some of this stuff. And So with the igloo, you can, if you can't find that really good crusty snow, you can pack snow with your snowshoes or skis.
Okay. Yeah.
And then let it set for an hour, and then take a big knife or a saw or a snow saw and cut out your blocks. So there are ways around making the perfect type of snow, right?
Yeah.
And then you're trying to build that spiral, and it's this perfect dome, and then it curves, and you got to put that keystone, that last chunk of snow in there.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Tie it all together.
Really, really tricky. But one of the things you can do is build your walls up, and again, put those branches over top and build more like a cabin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you just got the walls, and then you're just throwing some planks on the top of it.
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. So anybody can build walls out of snow blocks. So imagine building a nice square.
Yeah.
And build your walls up as high as you want them.
Yeah.
And then get some branches from the bush, some sticks, and put them across. And now you've got a pretty bomb-proof roof. Cut some snow blocks, put them on there.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad way to go. That's kind of the amateur or amateur igloo.
Yeah.
So you can modify these things and make them workable.
What's your plan this winter? You got a snow shelter in mind you're going to work on?
I'd like to go out. I used to do Quinzees every year.
Yeah.
But I find the Northern Rockies, we have so many Chinooks that it's not great area for it here.
Yeah.
If it gets super cold, now to hear all these tough guys doing -45,
Oh,
man, I gotta get out and try it. But yeah, I'd like to find a place with a good snow drift and do a snow cave in that.
Yeah.
I'd be down for that. But usually in the winter, and just a few days ago, actually, I did a double lean-to and a fire. That's my go-to.
Yeah.
There's something really cozy about a roaring fire through the night, you know. You can dry out your clothes, you can cook your food, scare away the bears, all of that, and
Yeah.
it's hard to beat.
I do like, I was doing a little research today too, just on like, so you got, just like based on these guys that are out winter camping in these temperatures, like a lot of these guys are taking little propane heaters with them, which works good. Like the one I got's like the Buddy one, so if it tips over, it'll turn off, and it's got like an oxygen sensor or something built into it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them recommend bringing like a CO detector too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, like with the Quinzees, like as you mentioned, you got to have those air holes going. Like, are you bringing like a CO detector or anything like that, or?
Well, we should talk about carbon dioxide versus carbon monoxide. So they're two different things, right? So if you're just, let's say you're three guys in a Quinzee, which I did, and we ate a bunch of chili, which was a bad idea. So we were like gassed out.
Yeah.
Don't anybody light a match, or this place is gonna blow. So that's carbon dioxide buildup, and that's not great.
Yeah.
You'll get headachy. But generally it's not super dangerous. If you got two little holes, air vents, you're going to be fine. Even if you did eat chili, it's just going to be miserable. Anytime you have combustion, so if you light a candle, the Inuit would have their oil lamps, right? Or if you're lighting a stove. So some people will cook in a snow shelter.
Yeah.
I would advise against that unless it's so cold out that it's a survival thing.
Yeah.
I would sooner cook outside, because you get that carbon monoxide buildup, and it can sneak up on you, so you don't know that it's coming, and you kind of fall asleep, you go unconscious, and you're dead by morning type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's that silent killer. A candle in a snow shelter is going to be fine. You got some air vents, no problem. But I wouldn't fire up your Whisper Light stove, and be sitting in there playing dice or cards. That's going to sneak up on you. It's going to be pretty dangerous.
We kind of touched about this like before we were recording the podcast, but I know there's like survival kits people have in their vehicles where they have a candle that's supposed to like keep them warm.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. There was a time in my life I was doing a lot of science research on this and kind of testing these survival myths. So it was Saskatchewan, I think it was minus 35.
Yeah.
I took my car and lit a candle inside, minus 35 outside, and I thought, okay, these kits all come with this nice candle.
Yeah. It'll be
I lit the
toasty.
candle. It did diddly squat. Like maybe it was minus 30. Like maybe it warmed at 5 degrees.
Yeah.
But minus 30 without a sleeping bag for the night, yeah, your legs will be frozen by morning.
Yeah.
You'll have frostbite. You might be dead. So the candle's not going to save you in a car, but in a snow shelter, it works way better because a car isn't insulated. The glass isn't there to keep you warm.
Yeah.
But a snow shelter course is insulated, right? Does that make sense? They're two very different scenarios. So I was asked by CBC Radio to talk about winter survival in Saskatchewan. I remember the host asked me, what should you do if your car breaks down? I said, well, you do want to stay with your car if you're in the middle of nowhere so people can find you, because the classic scenario on the prairies is, you see a light in the distance, right? And I'm in my running shoes. I'm going to walk to this farm, not realizing the farm is 35 kilometers away and you'll never make it. So stay with your vehicle. But I did say that vehicle can be a death trap.
Yeah.
If it's minus 5, you'll be fine. You'll be chilly. Hopefully you have a blanket.
Yeah.
You'll make it through the night. If it's minus 40, you'll be dead by morning in that car, even with a candle. So you've got a couple options now. Is it better to take your snow shovel, hopefully you have it in your car, and dig a snow cave in the ditch? You'd be way better off than in your car. Or if it's snowing outside, you could actually turn your vehicle into an insulated snow shelter.
Yeah.
Sleep in the dry seats of your vehicle, but now you got to pile snow all over this thing before you go to bed. So, and the lady was like, that's a hell of a lot of work. And I'm like, yeah, but you're going to die if you don't do that, right? Those are your choices. And I remember hearing a tragic story about a family that was stranded, and by morning, the child had died, the wife had died, and the husband or the father, his legs were frozen from the waist down.
Sheesh.
And they had just stayed in the vehicle.
Yeah.
So with a bit of survival skill, they could have built a snow shelter, and all three of them would have been alive by morning, right?
So in that scenario, do you have like a winter survival kit, like in your vehicle, like that would have a shovel and blanket and everything, like on you at all times, sort of thing?
Yeah, I like to throw a sleeping bag in because they're warm and cozy.
Yeah, I should do that. That's a good idea.
Just throw a sleeping bag in the back. We all have sleeping bags.
Yeah.
Candles good just for cheer. Like imagine you can't get that engine started because you broke down. It's going to provide some light, a little bit of warmth and cheer.
Yeah.
You can get sort of those long burning candles. You can get some sort of pot or tin can that holds your whole kit, and you can use that to melt snow, to make tea, or melt, coffee. Sort of bouillon cubes, like gravy cubes, are good.
Yeah.
So you can make like a little broth. And then it depends how serious on your survival stuff. I usually have snare wire, fish hooks, a compass, knives and that sort of thing, flint and steel. But, would I stay in my vehicle? I might, just because I've done a lot of winter survival, I might just go in the bush and build a lean-to with a roaring fire and be more cozy than I'm going to be in my vehicle. But it all depends on where you are and what your knowledge is, right?
One of the things when we were talking these snow shelters, I was looking up, is like, okay, what's the biggest thing to have? And like a lot of recommendations for a shovel, but like a nice a shovel that's like a shorter handled shovel, so when you're digging like inside the shelter, like you can maneuver around a little easier and have that as an option.
Yeah, get a good avalanche shovel. Like, don't cheap out with the $5 Walmart shovel. I've had them break. get a good Avi shovel because it'll last you your whole life, and they'll collapse to a short frame so you can scoop, and they'll also extend telescopically so you have a longer shovel there.
Yeah.
And I use them for ice fishing and all sorts of stuff. The other thing they recommend is when you settle in for the night, keep your shovel inside your shelter just in case you have an emergency and you have to dig your way out.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you're in the mountains and heaven forbid there's an avalanche in the night. You don't want to wake up and find that you've been buried.
Yeah.
If you don't have a shovel, you might not see the light of day type things. So just some of those tips.
Yeah.
I don't want to scare the pants off people. Like, you can do this quite safely, but just be aware of two things. Snow can collapse and carbon monoxide can kill.
Yeah.
If you're aware of those two and you're taking measures, you'll be fine. And start small. Like, you can build a snow shelter in your yard, or
yeah, I like that idea. Like when you were doing that with your kids, like you just have a big pile of snow, waiting for enough of it, and then yeah.
And the kids would help. We would, every day when it would snow, we just keep building it higher and higher until it was big enough to hollow out. Ready to go. And then you're right close to home.
Yeah.
Read them a little story, have a little candle in there. It's great fun.
I think that, like, I'd love to do that here. I feel like the dog would end up peeing on it. There'd be a lot of yellow snow in our snow shelter, but
dogs are a liability when it comes to snow shelters. I built an igloo once. Took me all day, and the farm dog came and crashed through the wall of the thing. So yeah, I was not a
little heartbroken
camper.
about that.
Yeah. I may have said a few colorful words. I can't remember.
I feel like this is something I want to do this winter. Right now it's like there's no snow around at the moment. It's a little warm here. So
yeah,
I know like Northern BC, a lot of these responses were coming in, like people winter camping in Northern BC or Northern Ontario. I might have to do a little trip like that. But if someone just getting started, you recommend like a Quinzee?
I think the Quinzee is the best way to go, unless you have a really good snowdrift that you can find.
Yeah.
And again, just keep that ceiling roof only a foot thick for your safety. Punch those little sticks in there so you know how deep it is. Yeah.
That's a good one.
And lay down some blankets and some foamies, get off the snow, your air mattress, and you'll find that's like, oh my goodness, this is actually pretty comfy in here. And it's actually cheerier than a tent because the walls are white.
Mm-hmm.
So you light that candle or your headlamp, it is just super bright in there and cheery. Yeah. It's quiet. You can't hear any outside noise. The wind's howling and you're in your special little cocoon there. It's actually quite nice.
Is a 3-person one the biggest one I guess with the kids you've had?
I built bigger ones than that. I used to build them for a winter festival in Saskatchewan too, and we would build them so people could walk in, sit on the sleeping shelves, and then we would make ice windows. So you can either chop a chunk of ice out of the lake, or you can. The easiest is to pour some water in like a tote, like a Rubbermaid.
Yeah.
Let it freeze. You get the perfect rectangle. And then you put some nice windows, so in the daytime you get some beautiful daylight shining in your Quinzee. You can get pretty technical on these things. They're a lot of fun.
Do we have anything like that in our area, like a winter festival where people are doing this kind of stuff? Like you mentioned, like Saskatchewan, that's what's going on. But
there's a Winter Magic Festival here in Hinton in February.
Yeah.
They've done the Carnival Bonhomme, sort of winter skills and ice fishing derby in the past, but maybe we should build that would be fun. Quinzee.
I feel like that's like I always say to like my friends and stuff too, is like, man, we're living in Alberta. We're gonna have winter half the year. So if you're not embracing it, you got to be like you're trapped inside for half the year. Then if you're not willing to go out and try some of this stuff, go fishing.
Yeah, totally. 6 months of winter.
Yeah, so you might as well learn these skills and. This is something that, that we've been talking about is like, if you can practice it ahead of time, then if you do get into a survival situation, you're not panicking. It's like, done this before. I know what I'm doing here. So
Totally, and I would really recommend that for anyone listening. Like, don't wait until your life is on the line to build one of these.
Yeah.
Do it in a safe place where it's fun and you can experiment, and that way, if your life ever does depend on it, you can fall back to what you've practiced and learned, right? Yeah, because chances are, if your life does depend on it, maybe you had a car accident, maybe there's an injury, maybe you're lost, like who knows, like there could be other factors that are just going to make this all the more difficult, right?
When it's minus 40 out, you say, I stomp on the snow and wait for an hour, and like, I'm not waiting that long. It's like, are we missing anything, Scott, on snow shelters then?
I think we touched on, I mean, there's so much. You just kind of have to practice with it, but I think we touched on most of it. It's very doable.
Yeah.
It's very fun. It's a fun family activity. You can do it with kids. You can go build a snow shelter on your next hunting trip or backpacking trip, and give it a try.
What's the time commitment on like a Quinzee? Like, let's say just you. Like, how long is it taking you to build one?
I would give yourself a good 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Because remember, you're going to make that big pile. Now you got to let it set for an hour, and now you got to hollow it out. So it is a big time commitment. It's not like something you want to do when the sun's going down.
Yeah.
If you're going to have one for the night, start in the afternoon so it's ready by night.
Yeah.
Ideally, you've got to change of clothes because you're going to be so sweaty by the time it's done and wet just from lying in the snow.
Yeah.
So, but that's why snow cave is way quicker in a snow trench. Like, you can build a snow cave in an hour.
Yeah, that pile's already there for you.
Might be 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or a snow trench, that military one, is pretty quick.
Pretty quick. Okay. If we get the right amount of snow this winter, let's do a live podcast in Quincy.
I think that'd be great.
That'd be fun.
I'm down.
Okay. Questions for Scott, send them in to wildernesswave@outlook.com. You can follow along with Scott's adventures, and Scott's always out winter camping at
Northern Rockies bushcraft.
That's it. You want to talk about your book?
Oh, well, do I ever?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm getting a book published. I think the working title right now is My Bushcraft Life, but it's going to be a memoir of wilderness adventures and mishaps and shenanigans. So a lot of near-death experiences, a lot of humility, a lot of lessons learned the hard way, things that almost killed me. And I hope it'll be fun. A lot of childhood adventures, sort of Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer type stuff. And
how long has this book been in the making for?
I've been writing it for 12 years.
Yeah.
And finally getting it published this coming year. And I'm going to put it into audiobook as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Does it feel like a weight off your shoulders now? Like, okay, finally it's getting out there. And
I think until I hold it in my grubby little hands and see it, it's not going to feel real. But yeah, no, I'm pretty stoked, and I figure at very least it's a memoir for my my kids, my family.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I think I wish I had stories from my grandfather. He had so many adventures that kind of got buried with him, and I didn't want that to be my situation. So
it's cool to have that legacy where you can look back on it. And so what are we thinking, like mid next year be out sort of thing?
I'm hoping by summer 2025 here. Yeah.
Cool.
So that's right. It's going to be on everybody's Christmas list next year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for coming on, Scott. That's I think this is a big one, and like from the feedback we've got on the winter camping one, go check that one out too, episode 4. If you're looking to get out and explore, there's some real good tips on there, and follow along with Scott because he's always out there. So at Northern Rockies Bushcraft on Instagram.
And folks, if you're going to do a snow shelter, give us an update how it went.
Send us pictures, send us an email, wildernesswave@outlook.com. Would love to see it. And maybe we'll learn some of the things that you've done. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and thanks for all the reviews too. It's coming in. Podcast is it's fun having you guys a part of it. So we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Wilderness Wavelength.